6 mindset patterns that shape behavior. There's a certain kind of moment most people have never slowed down enough to name. It happens when you are in the middle of doing something, making a decision, reacting to someone, choosing silence over speech or speech over silence. And somewhere beneath the action, there is a quiet, almost invisible logic running. A set of rules you never consciously agreed to. A lens you have been looking through so long, it no longer feels like a lens. It just feels like the world. And what makes this strange is not that the pattern is there. It is that most people spend their entire lives operating inside these patterns without ever once stepping outside them long enough to see them clearly. That is not a criticism. It is simply what happens when something is wired early enough and reinforced often enough. It stops being a choice. It becomes the shape of how you think. People tend to talk about behavior as if it were the thing, as if the action itself, the avoidance, the overworking, the people-pleasing, the shutting down, were the whole story. But behavior is almost always downstream of something older and quieter. And that quieter thing is the mindset pattern underneath it. There are 6 of these patterns that psychologists and neuroscientists keep returning to, not because they are flaws to be fixed, but because they are coherent internal systems that were built for a specific reason and have been running ever since. The first is what researchers sometimes call a fixed orientation toward threat. The brain, at its most fundamental level, is a prediction machine. It is not trying to perceive reality accurately, it is trying to anticipate danger before it arrives. For some people, this calibration was set early in environments where unpredictability was the norm. What develops is a nervous system that stays slightly elevated, slightly watchful, even when there is nothing to watch for. Neuroscience shows that the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, can remain sensitized well into adulthood when the early environment consistently paired uncertainty with consequence. This is not anxiety as a personality flaw. It is a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. The second pattern involves what psychologists call the locus of control. Some people have an internal locus. They experience themselves as the primary author of what happens to them. Others carry an external one. They experience outcomes as largely determined by forces outside themselves. Neither is entirely wrong because neither is entirely right. Life is genuinely a mixture of both. But the pattern sets early, often shaped by how much agency a child actually had in their environment. If effort reliably produced outcomes, internality tends to develop. If effort felt irrelevant, if the environment was chaotic or controlled by an unpredictable adult, externality often follows. The trade-off is subtle. External orientation can protect against crushing self-blame, while internal orientation can produce resilience, but also a particular kind of exhaustion. The third pattern is what researchers call cognitive closure, the need for clear answers and a resistance to ambiguity. Some minds are deeply comfortable sitting in the unresolved. Others find open questions genuinely distressing. Studies in cognitive psychology suggest this is not a matter of intelligence, but of tolerance. The brain, for some people, has learned that uncertainty equals danger. The drive toward closure is the drive toward predictability. And again, the developmental roots are almost always traceable to environments where not knowing was followed by something difficult. The fourth pattern involves identity protective cognition, the way the mind filters incoming information to protect the self-concept it has built. This is not self-deception in the cynical sense, it is a deeply human function. The brain has a powerful investment in the coherence of the self. Information that threatens that coherence, that suggests we might be wrong about something we believe defines us, triggers a response that looks from the outside like stubbornness or defensiveness, but from the inside it feels like integrity. The research here is fascinating and somewhat humbling. This happens in everyone, across every worldview, every background. The form changes. The function is universal. The fifth is what developmental psychology calls the attachment orientation. the internal model of how relationships work, built from the earliest experiences of being close to another person. These models become the lens through which intimacy is interpreted. Someone with an anxious attachment reads silence as withdrawal. Someone with avoidant patterning reads closeness as a potential loss of self. Someone who developed a more secure foundation tends to read ambiguity in relationships as just ambiguity, temporary, resolvable, not a verdict. These are not choices made in adulthood. They are architectures built in childhood, and they run almost entirely below awareness. The surprising thing is not how persistent they are, it is how logical they become once you understand where they came from. The sixth pattern is perhaps the most counterintuitive. Psychologists call it self-handicapping, the tendency to create conditions for potential failure before high-stakes moments. The person who procrastinates on something important, the one who doesn't quite prepare, who arranges an exit before the door is even opened. From the outside, it looks like self-sabotage. From the inside, it is a sophisticated form of ego protection. If you don't fully try and you fail, the failure doesn't define you. The threat being managed is not failure itself, it is what failure might confirm about your worth. The research on this pattern is striking because it reveals how much energy the mind will invest in protecting the story it holds about itself, even at the cost of the thing it actually wants. What connects all six of these is that none of them began as dysfunction. Each one developed in a context where it made sense, where it was, in some quiet way, adaptive. The nervous system that stays vigilant was once in an environment where vigilance was appropriate. The mind that seeks closure was once in a place where ambiguity was genuinely unsafe. The person who self-handicaps learned somewhere, somehow, that their core value was under threat. The patterns became problems not because they were wrong at their origin, but because the context shifted and the patterns didn't. This is the part that tends to go unsaid. Most conversations about mindset focus on changing the pattern, replacing it, upgrading it. But there is something worth pausing on before any of that, which is simply the recognition that the pattern made sense, that the person who carries it is not broken or irrational or weak. They are someone whose nervous system and cognition organized themselves around a particular set of early experiences and have been running that same operating system with remarkable consistency ever since. The cost is real. These patterns do create friction. They narrow options, repeat loops, generate suffering that is genuinely unnecessary in a context where the original threat no longer exists. That is not nothing, but neither is the pattern itself. Because inside every one of them is also evidence of something, of a mind that was trying to survive, to maintain coherence, to protect something it valued. There is a kind of quiet intelligence in each of these configurations that tends to get lost when we move too quickly to fixing them. Seeing the pattern is not the same as being trapped by it, but it is the necessary first step to anything else. Not because awareness changes everything automatically, it rarely does, but because it changes the relationship to the behavior. The moment a pattern becomes visible, it stops being the invisible air you breathe and becomes something you can actually examine, not with judgment, but with a quality closer to curiosity, closer to recognition. If any of this felt less like new information and more like something you already somehow knew, that feeling is worth paying attention to. It usually means you're closer to the surface of something, and there is more underneath if you are interested in going there.